Well, good morning or good afternoon, depending on your location. And I want to thank everyone for the opportunity to present. I am going to give. Let's see. I am hopeful that folks can see my screen, and if they can't, we will. Here we go. Give me a moment. Hopeful that folks can see my screen. If they cannot, then we will soldier on without it. I wanted to talk about a couple different things here. One would be just to give you a welcome and talk to you about the MBTA. The MBTA is the 5th largest transit system in North America. We are also the most multimodal of transit systems across the country. We in fact operate not only light rail, heavy rail, bus, commuter rail, which we had the opportunity to talk with Rob Diadamo a bit ago, and we also operate the paratransit service for. We also operate paratransit for our customers who have those specific needs. One of the things I think it's worth talking about, and I'm hopeful. Can folks see my screen now? I'm not positive that they can, but I'm hopeful that you can. One of the things I did want to talk about specifically was how ridership has been affected by COVID-19. This has really obviously been a challenging period for us as an organization. What we essentially saw in March, ridership essentially dropped like a rock as various closures occurred. And we basically got down to the point where we were probably running at about 20% capacity on our bus line and about 10% capacity on our subway line. And what that meant was obviously a severe decline in ridership. And I think one of the things that really struck us was the places where ridership declined the slowest was on bus and on one of our heavy rail lines, known as the Blue Line, and then also on our paratransit as well. And what we've seen over time is that it is coming back more rapidly in those areas. Right now, we're at about 40% capacity on bus, about 40% capacity on the Blue Line. We're still at about 20% capacity on the remainder of our subway system, and our commuter rail remains below roughly around 10%. One of the things that we've really emphasized as we've gone here is and I'd say the two pieces of innovation I want to talk about are digital innovation and what I'll call analog innovation. For the digital innovation piece, we've been able to provision real-time crowding information to our customers in a way that I frankly didn't think was possible. We have always had a service delivery policy that talks about crowding. For a standard 40-foot bus, that used to mean 56 customers on the bus at peak was considered crowded. Obviously, with different mores, with different health standards and different expectations from our customers, we've had to change that, and we have changed that to now it's 20 customers per bus, which is based on a spatial assessment of the vehicle, and then thinking about a 3-foot distance, which has been the World Health Organization guidance, a 3-foot distance between customers on the bus, which we set as our new standard. We also set standards for our various other vehicles. What we do now is we communicate historical crowding data to customers. This is when the system is most crowded. This is when it's least crowded. But I think the most interesting piece for us has been the ability to provision real-time crowding information to customers on specifically on most of our major bus routes. And we do this with our automated people counter technology, which we've essentially repurposed. This is information that was really intended not to be used on a real-time basis. We collect the data using infrared streams. We're able to figure out on the basis of 2 streams and how they're interrupted, how many people are boarding a bus, how many people are alighting the bus. We were able to repurpose this, put it in a real-time format, and communicate it to our customers. We are running crowded buses. I think I have to say that as a statement of fact. Right now, with ridership increasing to about 40%, about 14% of our bus trips on a passenger-weighted basis are now on buses that are crowded with more than 20 people on it. 42% has some crowding, which we say is between 10 and 20%, and then below 10%. Below 10 passengers, about 44% of our buses. So 86% of our buses right now are running on a non-crowded basis. And we are able to communicate this to customers on our MBTA.com app, as well as we have e-ink signs up at major bus stops. In addition, we also partner with a variety of third-party apps, I think the most prominent among them being the Transit app, where we are able to show whether or not the approaching bus and the buses that follow it, whether or not they're crowded. Again, giving customers who have the ability to make these choices, we have the ability to tell customers if they, how crowded is the bus that's coming towards them, and then what are their other options in terms of less crowded routes of travel. So that would be the digital piece. The analog piece I want to talk about is surges, and this is pretty simple, but it's been an important part of accomplishing things in this COVID-19 environment that we didn't think we could accomplish. And essentially, the surge is a way to solve, I think, the transit problem. For most of the properties, I would guess on this call, you're not necessarily running 24 hours a day, and you're struggling with the idea that you have a work window overnight, which could be anywhere from 6 to 8 hours overnight, where once you've mobilized, once you've factored in mobilization and demobilization, the time you have for productive work is quite small. And we essentially found, we built up to, we started doing more weekend diversions. Then we did weekend diversions in the central core of the system. And then we proposed to do 2 sets of weekday closures this year. But when the COVID-19 pandemic hit and ridership dropped substantially, and including alongside the drop in ridership, there were a couple other important developments. One was much lower traffic and congestion, which again allows us to operate bus shuttles more efficiently. And there's virtually no intracity bus travel there was no, and there isn't now either, intracity bus travel in the United States. So you had lots of commercial carriers with lots of capacity. So we took advantage of these 3 conditions, and we built in a bunch of other weekday diversions on top of the 2 we'd already planned. So we did one of the Blue Line, which is a particularly difficult one for us to divert around because it goes under Boston Harbor. So you're really constrained. You've got 1 tunnel to run a diversion on. We also put in 2 other diversions on the Green Line, our light rail route, and we put in a large diversion on the Red Line, which is again our heavy rail that runs north-south in the system. All told, this allowed us to avoid a whole bunch of weekend closures. It also allowed us to accelerate, for instance, on the D branch of the Green Line, we were able to close for 2 9-day periods during June, which essentially saved us 180 days of early access and weekend work. So essentially 162 days of work we were able to get done in 18 days by working around the clock. And the rest of the diversions follow the same, the same pattern. We were able to close the Red Line for two weeks. That saved us 60 days of shifts. So we view that as a savings of 40 days. We were able to close the Green Line C branch with similar results and other branches. What that's allowed us to do as part of a larger investment program is we've essentially, from fiscal year 18 to fiscal year 20, the MBTA has doubled its amount of capital spending. And I can't tell you what an impact that has had on both safety and reliability. We were able to do, back in FY18, we did a little under 900 million in capital investment. In 2020, we were able to do almost 1.7 billion. So a real substantial increase in the amount of capital spending that we've been able to do. Part of the reason we're able to do that is because we were able to more aggressively close down certain services, and in some cases, not only close down the services, but add in additional work, mobilize additional parts of the workforce, because you've got the 24/7 access to the track, so you're able to do a lot more things. So I'd like to conclude by noting that obviously COVID-19 has had just a horrific impact on society as a whole. It has been very difficult to manage through as a transit system. But we have tried to center our riders and the current riders we have in all of our thinking as we think about this. An important part of that is provisioning them with information so they can make educated decisions about what they plan to do. And it's also allowed us to increase our investment in the system by taking advantage of the low ridership and doing an additional, just being able to accelerate capital work to such an extent that we believe it's going to be a significant improvement in the service that we provide. So with that, I will close, and I am happy to answer any questions that folks might have.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate that. And you keep the trains on time, I noticed. So I just think that's wonderful. So I would like to scroll back, if I could, for a moment and ask one of the questions that came up, which is now gone from my screen. So I'm going to have to save it for our panel session. So never mind to that. But if you could perhaps tell me a little bit more about what you think the long-term impact will be of COVID. What is going to change post-COVID for your agency in terms of the way you operate, even outside of a virus situation? What did you discover about your agency?
Yes, I think oops, I think I have a mic issue here. Let me,
and now we just lost your audio. We had it a second ago.
Okay, let me, I'm back. I think it may be my speaker is giving some looping feedback. Are we still good?
Yes, you sound fine. Okay.
Well, it's done a couple things. One, I think it's accelerated our thinking on bus. The COVID-19 reduced our ridership to the kind of the folks who are utterly dependent on transit. They do not have other options. They do not have work from home options, and it's really made a tremendous it's made a tremendous impact on our staff, understanding how people depend on the transit system. In fact, we knew even at our lowest ridership level, which was about 90,000 on bus, 40,000 on the subway, and we were still getting about 1,000 seniors a day who were tapping in and tapping out of the system. My guess is in April, no seniors were willingly traveling for discretionary purposes. So it's certainly shown us with a bright light sort of where are the areas where we have a real dependence on transit and a transit need. And as people have come back, it hasn't come back. I give the aggregate statistic, 40% ridership on bus. It's widely variant by route. We have buses that are already at 60% capacity in certain neighborhoods, and it's informed our thinking of how do we redistribute capacity. And we have been doing a planning exercise, and we've put it in place not only for the summer, but for the fall, pulling buses off of low volume routes, putting them on higher volume routes. So I think it's certainly made us think about that. I think on the other side, we are beginning to think more, our commuter rail ridership has been very low. I said it was around 8 or 9%. and does not appear to be coming back. The slope of the line is much lower than it is for bus and some of our transit lines. So we are starting to think about, are we providing the right amount of transportation? And do we need to think differently about commuter rail? And I think I neglected, when I was sort of bragging there earlier about us being multimodal, I think I neglected to mention that we also run ferries, and our ferry ridership is tracking pretty closely with commuter rail. So I think we are going to engage in a service planning discussion, a public discussion in the fall. That's going to look at all modes, but my expectation is we'll take careful look at that as well.
I appreciate that, because let's just talk about my office. So where I sit in my home right now, I am 10 minutes from my office. I could go in my office if I wanted to. I don't need to. I was used to it before because, a bunch of us here were road warriors. We're kind of used to this, but so many people in my office are discovering, hey, I don't need to be in the office today. So post-COVID, to me, I can see a major change in the way we all work. And certainly that changes everything for you all in terms of how many people you are carrying during rush hour every day. So I know that you're planning for this, and I don't know how you exactly can figure out what that long-term consequence is, because you're not sure who's coming back, who's not going to come back, and what are they coming back to.
And I think this is one of the unknowns we're grappling with. I mean, I sort of have the same experience. I do go into the office a couple days a week. I sometimes feel like there's almost a performative aspect to it, because it's not as if there are many other people there. And it's not as if there's not much of a value add, because I go into the office and I'm on a box talking to other people on a box that I don't, it's not as if I'm bumping into someone in the hall and there's this great, agglomeration effect from being by myself in an office building. And so I think it is one of these questions. And I think, we've been grappling with what will be the timetable, how many people will return at all? Will they return kind of on a, 2 days on, 3 days off? The Boston public school system has been wrestling with this idea as well. So, we're trying to and we're also trying to understand what the timing will be. We have been doing scenario after scenario, trying to figure out what fare revenue will look like. I think I'm sort of coming to the conclusion as well that I think our initial thinking, perhaps our initial somewhat naive thinking, was we were thinking of a vaccine as a binary event. A vaccine will be introduced and ridership will go from 40% to 70% the next month. I think, as the reality of this sort of sets in over time, a vaccine doesn't solve the problem. Vaccinations do. Right. So the production and the widespread distribution and administration of the vaccine is what I think will build greater confidence in people going out. And that is not a binary event. At least, I just run trains and buses. So I invite more talented people than me to tell me I'm wrong. But my sense is that's going to take some time.
And actually, you just brought up an interesting question. I would think within your agency yourself, when a vaccine is available, you might have to prioritize which of your staff gets vaccinated first. I mean, is that a thing?
I think this will feel somewhat like the provision of testing, at least in the early days, where I think we had to aggressively advocate to make sure that our employees had access to testing. And we also had to be thoughtful about sending certain groups of employees for testing, whether or not they were symptomatic. For us, there's a couple key units. I mean, the MBTA has 6,300 employees, which, depending on where you sit, is either a lot, or I guess if you're the MTA, that's a small regional authority. But we have units like our dispatch unit. We don't have that many people in dispatch. We don't have that many people in signal repair. But if either one of those entities were to be, if there were to be a super spreader event in either one of those groups, we would be, we wouldn't be able to operate service. So, we did have to think about sending those folks out, even though we were asymptomatic, to get testing. And in fact, we did find a couple people who were positive but asymptomatic, and we're glad we caught them when we did.
That's interesting to think about, because I wasn't going there. I was thinking more about your people that have constant contact with the public. But what you're bringing up is also important too, that you have people in crucial jobs that if one or two of them or three or four go down, you're devastated and can't operate. So it's almost like all of your people are first priority. That's
I hope we're not put in that position. But this is an open question. What is the level of production that is possible of a vaccine? And then, there have been, I will not veer into the political, but, there have been shortcomings in kind of the centralization of leadership around this pandemic. And I'm hopeful that we have those problems addressed by the time we have a vaccine that's ready to be distributed broadly.